Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Brandon always had a very clear idea of what he wanted in life. From a young age, he carried a simple yet increasingly rare desire, to build a true family. The kind you look at and feel proud of. Where there's partnership, love, respect, and security. He was always that kind of man. The kind who believes in the value of commitment, who sees marriage as more than just a beautiful ceremony or a piece of paper. For him, it was a symbol. A pact that went beyond words. It was about putting out into the world, in a clear way, that this love had an owner, had responsibility, that it was something to be nurtured every single day. When he met Sophie, everything seemed to make sense. She was fun, charismatic, with a smile that made any worry disappear. She was the kind of woman who could walk into any place and, within minutes, everyone would be charmed. Brandon fell in love quickly, and he fell hard. In the first few months, everything was perfect. They went out together, planned trips, laughed at silly things, spent nights talking about life, dreams, and the future. And it was during these conversations that he noticed something that bothered him more than he cared to admit. Every time the topic of marriage came up, Sophie would dodge it. She'd change the subject, make a joke, steer the conversation elsewhere. Over time, what seemed like just a playful avoidance took on a more serious tone. She started making it clear that she didn't care much for marriage. She said it was something society imposed, just a piece of paper, and that true love didn't need those kinds of ties. That what mattered was living together, the connection, not a signature. Brandon, at first, tried not to dwell too much on it. He convinced himself that she just needed time. After all, they loved each other, and that was obvious. He believed that as the years went by, she would understand that formalizing their love wasn't about pressure but about care, about protection. That it was about them, about what they were building together, not about pleasing the outside world. Time passed, and despite his efforts to avoid it, that issue started weighing heavily on him. Watching his friends getting married, some starting families, others buying houses, building things together, made him question whether he was heading in the right direction. Because, although their life together was good, it always felt like something was missing. It was as if he was giving everything he had, betting all his chips on that love, and in return, he was only receiving part of what Sophie was willing to give, on her own terms and within her limits. And even though she made it clear that she loved him, that she wanted to be with him, every time he brought up the subject, her response was always the same. Something like, "Why do you need this? What changes? We already live like we're married." And deep down, this hurt more than he admitted. Because it wasn't just about wanting a party or status. It was about feeling that she was willing to commit in the same way he was. About knowing that their love was strong enough to declare to the world, not just lived secretly behind closed doors. Still, Brandon chose to keep moving forward. Because for him, loving also meant giving in. It meant understanding that people aren't exactly how we wish they were. That everyone has their traumas, fears, and experiences. And because he believed Sophie was the woman of his life, he decided to wait. To wait for her to realize on her own, in her own time, that marriage wasn't a prison or an imposition. It was just confirmation that they were walking together, toward the same place, with the same dreams and purposes. The problem was that while Brandon believed this, Sophie had a completely different perspective. And little by little, what was hope for him became a burden for her. Something she needed to avoid, run away from, pretend didn't exist. And without Brandon noticing, that love he treated as a priority, Sophie was starting to put on the back burner. She began valuing her own freedom, her own desires, her belief in living without constraints. And that's when, without realizing it, she started making decisions that would sooner or later have devastating consequences. Decisions that, once revealed, would completely change the course of both their lives. And there would be no going back. Brandon was in another state, focused on important training for his career, when he received a message that froze his entire body. It was from Sophie. Short, direct, and completely out of context. She wrote only that she needed to talk, that she had made a mistake, that she didn't know how to tell him. For a few seconds, he thought it might be some misunderstanding, maybe a silly argument, a work problem, something simple that she was exaggerating. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. His heart raced. His hands started sweating. His head felt heavy, as if suddenly a million thoughts were crashing into each other. He tried calling her, but she didn't answer. He sent a message, and she only replied that it was serious and that it had to be in person. At that moment, he didn't think twice. He interrupted everything he was doing, told his supervisor he needed to handle an urgent matter, and caught the first flight back home. The trip felt endless. His chest tightened as if every minute of waiting was torture. Brandon tried to mentally prepare for anything, but no matter how many scenarios he imagined, none came close to what he was about to hear. As soon as he arrived, he opened the door, looked around, and noticed something strange in Sophie's eyes. She was restless, pacing back and forth, fidgeting with her hands, breathing heavily. She wouldn't even look directly at him. It was as if she wanted to be anywhere but there. Brandon realized immediately that this wasn't just a casual conversation. He asked what was happening, urging her to be direct. And she was. With a shaky, trembling voice, she let out the words that shattered everything inside him. She said she was pregnant. But before he could even react, she added, the baby wasn't his. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Brandon stared at her, trying to process it. For a few seconds, he stood completely still, staring, hoping she would say it was a lie, some cruel joke, that she had lost her mind, anything that could make it not real. But Sophie was serious, nervous, tears welling up in her eyes, waiting for his reaction. She then revealed that, a few months ago, during a period when things between them had been somewhat distant, she ended up getting involved with a coworker. His name was Derek. At first, according to her, it was just an exchange of messages, silly conversations, venting about life. And before she knew it, they were meeting outside of work hours. She said it all happened quickly, that she let herself get carried away, that she didn't plan it, that she didn't know how it had gotten to this point. Brandon listened to everything in silence. He didn't interrupt. He just looked at her, with a mix of disbelief, disappointment, and pain that felt too big to contain. Each word coming out of her mouth felt like a blade cutting through him. And when she finished speaking, he simply took a deep breath, turned his back, went upstairs, entered the guest room, grabbed a pillow, a blanket, and lay down. He didn't have the strength to argue, to fight, or to try to understand anything more. It was as if, within minutes, everything they had built together had been thrown in the trash. And he didn't even know how to react. His mind spun, his stomach churned, and his chest hurt like never before. That night, lying there, staring at the ceiling, Brandon mentally replayed every detail of the past few years. The conversations, the plans, the promises. He tried to figure out when it all started to fall apart. He searched for signs, clues, anything that might have shown that Sophie was willing to throw it all away. And as much as he searched, he realized that many times he had chosen to ignore things that now made complete sense. He remembered moments when she seemed distant, outings that seemed innocent, conversations she avoided, nights when she said she was too tired, that she had stayed late at work. All of it now fit together in a cruel way, like a movie playing in his head, showing scenes he had refused to see at the time. And contrary to what many might imagine, he didn't feel anger. What Brandon felt at that moment was a void so vast, so overwhelming, it felt like his soul had been ripped out. Because for someone who truly loves, there is no greater pain than being betrayed by the one you trusted, protected, respected, and placed above everything else. That night, he understood that no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much it destroyed everything inside him, what was about to happen from that point on would completely change his life. Because from that moment on, he would never be the same man again. Brandon woke up before the alarm rang. He spent a few seconds staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out if all of this was really happening or if it was one of those nightmares where you wake up sweating. Unfortunately, it was real. He got up, went to the kitchen, made a strong coffee, and sat there in silence, watching his life crumble right in front of him. He didn't even notice how long he stayed like that until he heard footsteps coming from the hallway. When he turned, he saw Sophie. She appeared, a bit awkwardly, with that look of someone who knows they've done something unforgivable but pretends that maybe things can still be fixed. She tried to act like it was just another morning. She grabbed a mug, poured some coffee, and stood there next to him, waiting for him to say something. But Brandon kept silent. She then took a deep breath and, in a low voice that almost sounded like a whisper, said, "We need to talk." Brandon gripped the mug tightly, looked at her, and responded dryly, "Talk about what? You want me to help you pick out the baby's name?" Sophie lowered her head, gripping the mug so hard it seemed like it might break. She tried to argue. She said it was a mistake, that she was lost, that she didn't know how it happened, that it didn't make sense, that it was just a slip-up. That what they had was much bigger, that she didn't want to throw it all away over a stupid mistake. Brandon held back a nervous laugh. He squeezed his eyes shut and shook his head in disbelief before responding, "A slip-up? Are you looking me in the eye and telling me it was a slip-up? You cheated on me, got pregnant by another guy, and you're saying it was a slip-up?" And more, he took a deep breath, holding back the rage exploding inside him. "Are you asking me to raise another man's child? The child of a guy who slept with the woman who was theoretically my wife? By the way, you never wanted to be my wife, did you? You always ran away from that. And now I understand why. Marriage would mean commitment. It would mean respect. And that's exactly what you never had for me." Sophie tried to interrupt, shaking her head, crying, saying he was exaggerating, that it wasn't like that. But Brandon didn't let her. He continued, firmer now, his voice mixing pain and indignation, "You never wanted to get married because you always wanted to keep the door open for this kind of thing. You wanted the freedom to live however you pleased. To choose when it was convenient to be my girlfriend and when it was convenient to be single for others." She was left speechless. Tears streamed down her face, she trembled, but couldn't respond. She tried again to soften the situation. "I'm not going to argue. You're heated, we'll talk better tonight. I need to go to work." Brandon let out a sarcastic smile, crossed his arms, and replied bluntly, "Yeah, go ahead. If pretending life is normal is your thing, you're an expert at it, aren't you?" Sophie didn't respond. She left, went straight to the bathroom, slammed the door, and stayed there for a few minutes. As the shower water ran, Brandon stood frozen, staring into space, trying to figure out if this was really the woman he had loved all these years or if, in fact, he had never truly known who she was. When she came out, already dressed, she avoided looking him in the eye. She grabbed her bag, fixed her hair, took a deep breath, and before leaving, said one last thing, "We'll talk tonight, Brandon, you're too worked up right now." He didn't respond. He just watched her leave, closing the door as if nothing had happened. But inside, he already knew. That would be the last night she would set foot in that house as part of his life. And from that moment on, Brandon began planning the coldest, most calculated, and straightforward move of his entire life. Brandon stood there motionless, staring at the closed door, processing everything that had just happened. His mind was racing, but unlike the night before, he wasn't lost anymore. This time, something inside him had changed. It was as if, suddenly, a switch had flipped. It no longer made sense to keep questioning what led Sophie to do that or to try to figure out where he went wrong. In fact, he realized he had spent years investing everything in someone who, from the start, never shared the same vision of the future as him. She had simply accepted the emotional security he offered while always keeping a part of herself disconnected, free, ready to do exactly what she did. He took a deep breath, picked up his laptop, opened the spreadsheets, and started reviewing everything. He checked the house purchase contract, reviewed documents, pulled financial records, scrutinized every line carefully. Everything, absolutely everything, was in his name. There were no joint accounts, no cars in both names, no shared financing. He hadn't realized it before, but that old discomfort Sophie always showed when the topic of marriage came up now made perfect sense. She never wanted a formal bond, never wanted to share anything, because deep down, she always kept an escape route open. She was fully aware that, should something like this ever happen, she would leave without any obligations, without any real commitment. Brandon took a deep breath, clenched his jaw, picked up his phone, and called a lawyer he had known and trusted for years. He told him everything, every detail, every conversation, every action. On the other end of the line, the lawyer listened silently, absorbing every piece of information. When Brandon finished, the response was direct, firm, and objective. The situation was entirely in his favor. Sophie had no rights to the house or his assets. The only thing they needed to ensure was that everything was done legally, with documentation, records, protocols, and zero room for any future disputes. He hung up the phone and, without wasting time, started emptying her closet. Clothes, shoes, bags, makeup, personal items, all were carefully packed into suitcases and boxes. Every item he touched felt heavier than it should, as if loaded with memories, broken promises, conversations that now sounded fake, and moments that, looking back, he realized may not have been entirely real. Each closed suitcase marked the end of a phase in his life. When he finished, he grabbed a piece of paper, handwrote a clear, direct note with no room for interpretation. It stated that she had until 6 p.m. the following day to remove all her belongings from the house. From that point on, any communication between them would only happen through lawyers. No more conversations, arguments, or reconciliations. It was over. Final. And above all else, he was preserving whatever little dignity she still had. Time seemed to pass differently as he organized everything. His mind was sharp, cold, and objective. For the first time, Brandon wasn't letting emotions take over. Everything was rational, practical, strategic. And in a way, this made him feel alive again. As if breaking apart had finally helped him understand who he truly was and what he was capable of. When he finished organizing everything, he looked at the house and realized that this place, which once represented love, safety, and the future, now just felt like a property. 4 walls and a roof. Nothing more. And he knew that, for him to live again, this needed to be completely remodeled. Mentally, he started planning, changing the locks, moving the furniture, repainting, renewing everything. Erasing every trace of her from that place. Around 5 in the afternoon, Sophie returned from work. She arrived, opened the door, and stopped the second she stepped inside. She saw the suitcases lined up in the hallway, the boxes, everything separated. She went pale. She stopped, dropped her bag on the floor, and stood silently, trying to process whether this was really happening. Brandon was sitting, waiting, exactly as he had planned. He stood up, looked her in the eyes, and spoke with a calmness that bordered on unsettling. "You have until 6 o'clock tomorrow evening to take your things from here. From now on, any matters between us will be handled through lawyers. No conversation, no discussion, no appeal." Sophie stood motionless for a few seconds. Then, stuttering, she tried to argue, "Brandon, we don't need this. We can work it out. I already told you, it was a mistake. We can get past it. We have history, a life together. You can't throw everything away like this." He laughed, shook his head, crossed his arms, and responded firmly, "I'm not throwing it away. You're the one who threw it away. I'm just picking up the pieces of what's left." She started crying, tried to approach him, tried to hold his hand. She said they could talk, that they were both upset, that they needed to cool off, think, and understand. That he couldn't do this, not like this, not so definitively. She said it was just a rough patch, that they could go to therapy, that she was willing to fix things. But Brandon cut her off immediately. Willing now? After getting pregnant by another man? After cheating on me behind my back with someone from work? Do you really think this can be fixed? I'm a man, Sophie. I respect myself. You may not respect yourself, but I do. You're leaving here without taking a single thing. And you'll remember this for the rest of your life. She took a deep breath, tried to hold back her tears, and whispered, "You're being cruel." He didn't respond right away. He stared at her, choosing his words carefully, letting the silence weigh heavily for the longest moment before replying, "Cruel? Cruel is what you did. I'm just giving you what you chose for yourself." Sophie, realizing she had no more room to argue, turned around, grabbed the suitcases and her bag, and left, slamming the door behind her. She went straight to her mother's house. A few hours later, and as expected, it didn't take long for her to start playing the victim. She told the story her way, the way that was most convenient for her. And of course, she conveniently omitted the most important part. Brandon was calm, sitting on the couch reviewing some documents when his phone started ringing. He looked at the screen and saw the name, Sophie's mom. He took a deep breath, thought for a moment whether he should answer, but decided to go ahead. He put it on speakerphone and stayed silent, just listening. As soon as he answered, she launched into it. She came at him full force, barely pausing between sentences. "You're a monster. How could you do this? Kick out a pregnant woman? What kind of man are you? This isn't something you do, not even to a dog. You're cruel, cold, inhuman. This is psychological violence, you know. Do you think you'll get away with this? I'm going to report you. This is abandonment. It's emotional abuse. I'm going to the police station, I'm taking you to court. You won't get away with this, mark my words." Brandon stayed still, listening to everything without interrupting. Her words came like knives, one after another. She was yelling, angry, completely out of control, as if he were the villain of the story, as if everything happening was his fault. He waited for her to finish her tirade. And when he sensed she paused briefly to catch her breath, he interjected, his voice extremely calm, firm, and measured. "Can I ask you one question?" On the other end, she fell silent for 2 seconds, and he continued, "Did she tell you, that the baby in her belly, isn't mine? I just want to know that. Please, answer me. Just that." The silence that followed was heavier than any words she could have said. Brandon stayed still, staring at the phone, hearing only her heavy breathing. It was as if she had been struck by lightning. He took a deep breath, gripped the phone tightly, and pressed further, even more directly, "I listened to you insult me, call me every name in the book. You had all the energy in the world for that. So now, have at least the decency to answer this one question. Did she tell you, yes or no, that this baby isn't mine?" The silence lingered for a few more seconds, until she tried to cover it up. This must be some misunderstanding. Brandon closed his eyes, slowly shook his head, and smirked, the kind of smirk that shows he understands exactly the kind of people he's dealing with. Without apologizing or retracting any of the insults she had hurled minutes earlier, she simply hung up. And that sharp click of the phone ending the call was, for Brandon, the final confirmation that he wasn't just freeing himself from a woman who had betrayed him, he was liberating himself from an entire family that thrived on lies, disrespect, and hypocrisy. And in that moment, he had absolute certainty that, as painful as it was, this was the best decision of his life. Time passed. Life moved on, as it always does, with or without scars. Brandon focused on work, took care of the house, rebuilt his routine, and most importantly, his peace. There were no more messages, calls, arguments, or any contact with Sophie. It was as if she had simply vanished from the map. Until one day, while having coffee at a bakery, he ran into an old friend. The conversation started casually, until the friend blurted out, a bit awkwardly, holding back a smile, "Man, you won't believe what I heard." Apparently, Sophie told Derek about the pregnancy. But guess what? Derek flat out told her that the baby wasn't his. Turned his back on her and walked away like she was nothing. Brandon stayed silent, just listening, without reacting. The friend continued, "Obviously, she didn't accept it. She took it to court, demanded a DNA test, and even got a judge involved. And, to everyone's surprise, the baby was Derek's." At that moment, Brandon let out a faint smile, not one of mockery or revenge, but one of relief. Because even though deep down he already suspected, having that confirmation brought him peace. And he thought something he never imagined he would think, that if, by chance, that baby had been his, he would have taken care of it with all the love and responsibility in the world. Because he knew who he was. But he would have done it alone, without Sophie in his life, because after everything, she was the one piece that no longer fit into his future. The friend let out a short laugh, shook his head, and added, "And you know the best part? Derek had to acknowledge the baby because now it's in court, it's official, there's no way out. But acknowledging Sophie, well, that's another story. He made it crystal clear that he doesn't want to, he won't, and it never crossed his mind." Brandon held his coffee, stared into space, thinking about everything. And he couldn't help but reflect on the thought that came to him, almost as if it were an inevitable conclusion. What irony, she spent years saying marriage was just a piece of paper, commitment was a prison, she didn't need ties, she wanted freedom, and now here she is. Pregnant. Alone. And in the end, no one wants to claim her. He took a deep breath, slowly shook his head, and with all the serenity of someone who knows they made the right choice, simply said, "Life, it collects its dues. And it collects them precisely." Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.